Welcome to the Q&A session. I think before we actually start with members of the diplomatic corps obviously wanting to ask their particular question against your discussion of a global agenda, I first have to demonstrate on behalf of Singapore what we mean by service excellence. You mentioned earlier that you would have liked to have a banner for SG50.
Yes.
Well, incidentally, I think, Mr. Ban, it was good that you didn't come to Singapore last year, because if you did, and you walked on the streets, everywhere you'd be turning your head, because everybody would be saying SG this and SG that, and you would say, who, me? Who, me? But we wanted to demonstrate, because you just said in the earlier part of your speech that you would like to bring home a banner.
Yeah, okay.
We are producing a banner for SG50 for you to bring back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You also know that, some of you may know, you've heard the reference earlier when Secretary General mentioned about Rojak. That reference, of course, is to the fact that when he last came in 2012 and he was interviewed, he actually mentioned how he loved the Singapore cuisine, bak kut teh, Rojak, and so on, and he made a reference again to that. I have to apologize that for dinner later on, we don't have Rojak on the menu, but we'll try to look for it as much as possible.
Next time.
Now, I know there's a lot of people wanting to ask questions. All of them are young people, which is very good. But I thought perhaps what I could do, since this is a talk about leadership and your leadership in particular, I thought I could open up by just asking you one question,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
And that is, in the 10 years that you've helmed the United Nations, obviously you've seen so many global issues come up and go, and you've been right at the very core of it. If I could ask you just from a personal level, what would you say gave you the greatest sense of achievement and joy? And what was it that gave you the greatest sense of disappointment as you leave this position?
It's easy to ask. A lot of people ask, what have you done most during the last 10 years? It's very easy to ask, but very difficult for me to answer. Whatever I may say that I have achieved, I think those are all common achievements. It's not only me as a Secretary General. It's not just because I'm humble, but because anything which we have done could not have been done by any one person or by any one country. Of course, I explained about the Sustainable Development Goals and climate change. It's true that I have devoted almost the whole of my time and energy in making sure that climate change is properly addressed. I have traveled all around the world, wherever I could find and see for myself the impact of climate change. Because without seeing myself, I could not have convincing power. So I went to Arctic twice. I went to Antarctica once. I went to Amazon River Basin, where this rampant deforestation was taking place. Aral Sea, Lake Chad, you name it, Greenland, Iceland, all the places where I was able to see the melting glaciers. And on the Arctic ice, I've been sending out strong message, sounding alarm bells. And I have been working very hard to make sure that these Sustainable Development Goals, as a successor to MDG, must be adopted in time before 2015. I take pride that I was a part of this process, but I cannot claim that these are my legacies. This is a common achievement by all the member states, not only member states, business communities, civil societies. Civil societies, they have made a great contribution. When we were making this Sustainable Development Goals agenda, we reached out, United Nations reached out. This is not the United Nations only. At least 8 million people through UN survey, my world. The question was that what kind of a world do you want to see? A lot of millions of answers came, and we compiled, analyzed, and categorically we analyzed. Then this is the work. Through this work, we have 17 goals. And another area, if I may say, which I have put attention, is that gender empowerment. Gender empowerment. I really wanted to make sure that the United Nations can be a model so that I can, again, speak out to member states. I can speak out to member states. That's what I have been doing, but this could not have been done without the help of member state, business community, and civil society.
Thank you, sir. You know, in all the 8 lectures we've had, I have to say I have never seen so many people queuing up for questions. And we have a limited time. So if you don't mind, sir, what I suggest that I'll do is I would ask the first 2 speakers on each side, we take turns, to ask your 2 questions. Yes, sir. And then you can just choose which you would like to answer, or you may want to pull it all together. Okay. Because I think it's only fair that the people who are in the back of the queue also get a chance to ask your questions. So if I could ask on this side, could you ask the first 2, could you ask your questions? And sure. Then SG will decide how he wants to answer it. We'll then move to this side and you ask 2 questions. That way we can speed it up a little bit. Please, on your side.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Raini, final year student from SMU. Thank you so much for sharing your great insights with us today. I only have one question. The first Secretary General himself said that your job is the most impossible job on earth. So as a UN chief, how do you manage to deal with the pressure exerted on you by member states and various stakeholders while maintaining the focus on getting things done? Thank you.
How do you deal with the pressures that you have? I think that's a question, right? How does SG deal with all the pressures that he has as being in his role?
Yes.
Correct. Second one, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for your speech, Your Excellency. My name is Konstantin Stranges. I'm a talent advisor with a Fortune 500 organization. And my question is, any supranational organization is only as strong as the member states that make it up. And with the erosion of political backbone, let me call it, and principled leadership being replaced with more and more populism around the world, be it the US, be it in Europe, do you feel that the United Nations role in the world is being challenged by weaker leadership in some parts of the world?
Okay. Deal?
Well, okay, well, would you like to answer these first two, I think?
First of all, about how to deal with the pressure. Of course, there are so much pressures. Pressure coming from the crisis and pressure from the world, member state or civil societies. So there are 2 kinds of pressures. The most serious pressure is how to handle all these problems. This is a real pressure. Then pressures coming from outsiders, I think I can handle. I know how to be flexible, sometimes how to be firm. There are undue pressures to which I have been standing very firm against. Any undue pressures. You must do this or do that. There are some big powers sometimes. Then I have been standing out. But at the same time, you should also understand how to be flexible and nice and not to make people unhappy. That's wisdom. But I can share later on. But the real pressure, burden comes from how to handle this situation in Syria, Yemen, North Koreans. There are many, many issues. There are so many people are dying needlessly. How to address all this? These are real challenges and pressures. But this I cannot do alone. I have to have a full support from member states and partnership through business communities and civil society. And particularly, these days, civil society's voice has become much more stronger and more important. Then I need your support. I need your voices. When you raise your voice, it will make my job much easier. Then, again, second question. I'm conscious about the expectations about the United Nations and leadership of the United Nations and some shortcomings of the United Nations. This United Nations is a huge organization, 193, and have to deal with all the issues which are happening in this world, in this planet, including environment. Then, seemingly limitless, but people don't understand that there is a limit. That's why I'm asking that there should be a stronger partnership, stronger commitment by the member state, and stronger involvement and commitment of all the sectors of our life. It's not only Secretary General, it's not only member state, it's not only big countries, small countries or poor countries and civil societies, and they have to do all. But now, I admit and conscious of all this United Nations capacity. Some people are very critical that is United Nations necessary at this time? My answer is very simple. If there would be no United Nations, where could you find any common ground where we can discuss all these issues? If there would be no United Nations today, tomorrow, you have to establish another United Nations. That's my answer.
Thank you. So we have a serious problem here. The line is growing. So to be democratic, I'm going to have to add more people. 4 people ask a question in quick succession so the SG can take them all, okay? People, I've never seen such a long queue, sir, to ask you questions. Please.
Good evening, Mr. Ban. My name is Ding Zhi, and I'm from Serangoon Junior College. My questions are, firstly, do you think it is necessary for common person to be involved in global politics and diplomacy? Secondly,
excuse me, sorry. Could the organizers turn up the volume a bit more? It's not easy for us to hear. Okay. Or else you could speak a bit louder, please.
Speak
sorry.
to the microphone directly.
I'm sorry. Firstly, is that do you think it is necessary for common person like us to be involved in global diplomacy and politics? Second question is that how can the United Nations engage more with common person like us? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Nigel Lee from the Singapore American School. I want to ask you a question. And knowing that the Syrian civil war has reached its 6th year, it pains me to read the preamble of the UN Charter, which says, "We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime have brought untold sorrow to mankind." Now, with that in mind, how effective in your eyes and what challenges have you witnessed during your time as Secretary General when the Security Council has convened to deal with these issues as the P5 dominate its politics?
Thank you. Next person, please.
Hello, my name is Yunha, and I'm from Overseas Family School. So the question is, how can you be detached from South Korea or other nations' perspective and have a neutral viewpoint when solving global issues? Thank you.
Good evening, sir. My name is Eden. I'm from River Valley High School. So today my question to you is that in international politics, do you think that there's a concrete right and wrong? For example, for the issue of human rights. Like the Western countries, their ideas of human rights is very different, for example, from countries such as Singapore, what we think about human rights. So do you think that there's a concrete right and wrong in international politics in certain issues such as human rights? Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you have a huge problem because all the questions are quite different. I don't know how you're going to summarize and pull it together. But, well, you choose whichever ones. The questions, I think, there was one about how, I think the first one talked about how can the United Nations engage young people and how relevant can it be to young people. The second question was something in a way you've already answered. How, rather, an expression of cynicism about the effectiveness of the UN, which I think you've somewhat answered by saying if the UN weren't there, you'd have to create the UN. The last one was a very, I guess, theoretical issue about about moral rights and wrongs and so on. So take your pick, sir.
Okay, I will try to be as concise as possible. I think I have already explained extensively about the importance of engaging young people. That is that has to be elevated as one of the top priorities of the United Nations. We have spent much on all these conflict resolution issues. In the meantime, many young people have been drafted as child soldiers, and many young people have been killed or had to flee their homes without being able to be educated. That's why the United Nations, and including my successor, should do much more. I think I have paid a framework. I have established a framework, establishing certain mechanisms, but I know that, I admit that not much has been made. We are still working very hard to making networking and liaising with the youth groups. That I'm telling you that we are very much committed on that. On this, addressing the conflict issues, it's very important that member states should show unity of purpose. When member states are divided, particularly the Security Council is divided, it's only people, it's only the world which will suffer. We have seen good, very bad example in the case of Syria. How many resolutions the Security Council have been able to agree during last 6 years, while almost 5 million people had to flee? To be exact, 4.5 million people have become refugees in neighboring countries. And 16 million people need humanitarian assistance. The country has been almost devastated. Even then, the countries are now not united. The Security Council have shown so much divisions on this matter. It's not only Syria, on many other issues. Therefore, unity and unity of purpose is very much important at this time. On human rights issues, there are 3 pillars of the United Nations Charter: peace and security, development, human rights. Then which are more important, more important? I think those are 3 pillars, and they are equally important. Then without human rights, without human dignity, you cannot call a human being living. If there is no security, human rights can be abused. If there is no development, again, human rights cannot be properly protected. There would be no human dignity. Therefore, as far as human rights is concerned, I think that should be given the most attention. That's why in 2013, 3 years ago, after having learned the serious lessons and failure of the United Nations in Sri Lanka, I have initiated human rights upfront. So in all the cases, human rights should be brought upfront. That's the United Nations policy. But unfortunately, there are many people's human dignity and human rights are being abused. This is a very sad reality. But United Nations is committed. Human Rights Council is very much committed to promote and protect the human rights as a top priority.
Thank you, sir. If you would allow me, sir, because we've actually come close to the end of the whole session, but you've said earlier how you really encourage young people and so on to be involved. What I suggest is that there will be no more Q&A, but perhaps we could have it as a feedback for yourself, so that all the people here who've stood waiting to want to ask a question, if you and the audience is willing, I suggest that it would be a good idea if we went through with all your questions on both sides and allow SG to understand from you what is topmost in your mind as your concerns as young people, because the majority of you are young students. That will give you a sense of where young Singaporeans are coming from and what they're thinking about, and we would not require you to at all reply, but it would give you a sense, and I think it also is only fair because you've come all this way, you've had questions to ask, and I think as older people, we really want to hear from you. So sir, could we start with you, all the way down, and then this side, all the way down, ask your question and do not expect a reply from SG. Please.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Secretary General, or good morning, New York time. I'm Ukrainian ambassador to Singapore, and my question is very short. What is your recipe? What would you do? How we could resort legally to address the military aggression of the Russian Federation, which is the UNSC permanent member? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. I am Jiani, a first-year student from Millennium Institute. Singapore, being a small country, may economically but not physically be capable to accept refugees. How do you see Singaporeans playing a stronger role in promoting the welfare of refugees, both as a member of the global community but also as an individual, a young Singaporean? Thank you, General Secretary.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is William, alumni from S. Rajaranam School of International Studies. Thank you for your Excellency's excellent speech. So I have one question for you. Okay, as you might be aware, the haze problem caused by Indonesia forest fire has become a routine annual event. And which had a significant negative impact on Singapore. So what United Nations can do to resolve this issue, or at least mitigate the issue? Thank you.
Could I ask each of you, no doubt you're here to thank SG for his excellent speech and so on, but go straight to your question, please. We've got a long queue. Please, straight into your question.
Okay, SG, I'm Yu Chen from Singapore Management University. So my question is what kind of values and quality that UN wish to promote to the youth to increase their participation in international affairs? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. My name is Janine, and I am a history major from NTU. My question is, seeing the strong crackdown on drug abusers by the president of the Philippines at the moment, as well as the many different stances that nations take in regards to tackling drug-related issues, how do you think leaders should respond to the perennial drug issues, particularly in Southeast Asia, while paying attention to human rights issues? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, please. Hey, by the way, everybody who's there, please just stop. Please don't add on more people. I think this queue is growing. We stopped where I last mentioned.
Thank you, sir. My name is Anish Welde from the United World College, Southeast Asia. And across the world now, many young people like me see and fear countries and communities growing more inwards and looking more inwards at a point in time when the global community needs them the most. What can we as the youth do to actually influence our political leaders at times when it often seems impossible to make our voice heard?
Thank you.
My name is Naveen, and I'm from ACS International. Your Excellency, there's been a tide of nationalism that has been actually sweeping, many parts of the world. It's actually quite scary, in fact. In Europe, in America, and even in some parts of Asia, we are seeing calls for, political isolation. What do you think the role of the UN is under this new paradigm, under this new world that we live in? Thank you.
Are you both from ACS? I should be considered one question. Please.
Sorry, Your Excellency. Okay, my question will be quick. We see that the United Nations is inherently a diplomatic body, and any diplomatic body is made up of many different stakeholders with different self-interests. Does His Excellency feel that the UN has any sort of reform that they need to make in the future in order to overcome the disparity in self-interest between member nations? And if so, what sort of steps should be taken? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aditi, and I'm from the Singapore American School. Your Excellency, you mentioned a lot about youth leadership. So what do you believe the youth for today, or what leadership qualities do you believe that they need to be better leaders for tomorrow? Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Excellency. I'm Sai Kiran from Singapore Management University. I've been wanting to ask this question to you since 2009, so I hope you can reply. So the question is about the Sri Lankan civil war that happened. What was the one major thing that stopped the United Nations from getting into the conflict and stopping the actual war crimes from happening? And what possibly were the learnings from the exact incident? I would really like it if you can reply at some time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, Bang Ki-moon Chu장님. I'm from Korea, and my name is Choi Young-jun. Currently, I'm the member of the Overseas Korean Trading Association, and I'm helping people financially in AIA Singapore. So my question is what's the core value, main value when you make a decision? The second one is what number of percentage is it for South Korea and North Korea reunified? I'm an optimistic guy. I think that before 2030, 80% we reunify. But I really want to know your opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for your speech. As Tommy Ko highlighted in his recent article, your methods have come for considerable criticism, unfair criticism, I might add, from Western media. In response to this, how would you like to be remembered as a leader? And what would you like your legacy to be as an individual leader?
Thank you.
안녕하세요. My name is John, and I came from the Singapore Korean International School. I just want to ask that if you think that the Paris climate deal will be a success, and how can you ensure countries will follow it? Thank you.
Thank you.
안녕하세요, 반기문 사무총장님. My name is Jungwoo Park, and I'm a student from United World College of Southeast Asia, Dover. As a Korean myself, and listening to your speech and how you brought up the subject regarding the Korean Peninsula, I cannot help but ask, what do you wish you could have done more to ameliorate the issue at hand?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is John B. Kaur. I'm from Singapore American School. At Singapore, just like in most countries, Model United Nations is a big club. But as a participant myself, I've noticed that we spend hours on conferences and yet our ideas just go unused. Do you see any way to integrate the real United Nations with what the Model United Nations is doing? Thank you.
안녕하세요. I'm Koo Jae-hyun from ACS International, and you have focused much on reducing gender inequality in all member states of the UN. So as a foreigner living in Singapore, right, embracing all differences and races and so on, I could not help but envy such harmony. So what would you tell the young high school students, not only in Singapore, but more of all over the world, for an earlier start for a better change in future regarding gender inequality? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Liao Yongti from ACS International, and my question for you today is, you've talked a lot about your climate change initiatives and how you see it as one of the most important things to you, but yet, residing in the United States, perhaps you may have watched some right-wing media as well, you've seen there's quite a lot of denialism towards climate change as well. So what I would like to ask is just, what do you see as a way to overcome people who would stand in your way, like, say, in the climate change issue? Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My name is Siddhant, and I'm a student at United World College, Southeast Asia. As the Secretary General of the United Nations, you have been a part of implementing many global plans and initiating change across a spectrum of global issues. My question is, what do you consider the most important indicator of success? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Kavya Nayak, also from the United World College. My question relates to the rising political radicalism that you can see in the US and much of Western Europe in response to the migrant crisis. My specific question is, how can people move forward from using fear as a motivator for political radicalism to enact more positive change towards the issue of refugees? Thank you.
Thank you. Last two.
Your Excellency, it is an honor. My name is Dana, and I would like to ask, you've mentioned the UN Security Council's need for unity of purpose, yet there is still the fear or the possession of veto power. So I would like to ask, do you think it will be possible in your successor's time to enact or enforce P5 nation membership reform? Thank you.
Your Excellency, I'm Nana Kwame, and I'm from Ghana, Africa, and a student of UWC SEA East. You've spoken a lot about your aim for helping the youth and talking about youthful issues. And I just want to know, if you talk about all this without trying to give the youth a chance to show initiative, then we don't resolve anything. So I just want to know your take on giving the youth the ability to show initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. I must first of all apologize to the audience and beg your forbearance. We're running a little bit over time, but I think you all agree that with all young students here wanting to have a chance to ask a question, it would only be fair that you get a chance to ask it. But could I also ask the audience, could I ask the students here, for the first time, I know you're all very Singaporean, you say who you are, where you come from, and all that sort of thing, but we can do away with that. Could you just come to the mic, ask your question? Because there's a lot of you. Please.
Okay. Good evening, Your Excellency. Okay. Good evening, Your Excellency. I'm Etienne from Serangoon Junior College. Okay.
This is Singapore.
Okay.
Okay, please.
Okay. So let me go directly to my question. Okay. Given that your term is going to reach to an end by the end of this year, and looking back at your performance for your term as Secretary General of the UN, how will you compare yourself to your predecessors? Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Next one.
Your Excellency, I am Maria from SGI International. You are a peacemaker and you have contributed so much in the building of peace and security. However, you've been very negatively portrayed by Western media recently, and this portrayal is mostly not fair. Perhaps this is because they don't understand Asian culture and ideology, but I would really like to know how you react and feel about the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. I am Paketi from ACJC. To what extent of intervention must UN take to help war-torn countries should they have a government extremely unwilling to accept UN's help? How would you find the balance between government sovereignty and its citizens' human rights? 감사합니다.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My question is, you talked about the sustainable development. You talked about the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 that you've set, and you're talking about how we need to be more integrated and work together. But one of the things that we use in Model United Nations, you hear a lot of delegates that do, students that do Model United Nations use this phrase very often. Domestic law supersedes international law. So where the countries put their self-interests before first, and they put the international goals, characteristic these the SDGs. So how would you, what can the UN do, or what can you, as the Secretary General, do to balance this out and come up with a good solution?
Thank you. Thank you.
안녕하세요, 사무총장님. I have one question. What advice would you give to the following generation that you're providing mental in terms of responsibility of maintaining harmony of the world? Thank you.
My question is from the unique perspective of the UN Secretary General. How would you envision the future world in 50 years?
Your Excellency, China, United States, and Russia are able to launch at this point anti-satellite weapons, which put much of our communications network at risk. So even as China and Russia have proposed a draft treaty to prevent those weapons, the United States has opposed that treaty on grounds of national security. How can countries work together to fix this issue? Thank you so much.
Your Excellency, given that corruption is the biggest obstacle of governments to raise human development and also to promote climate sustainability, how do you think that the UN can or should combat corruption in governments?
Good evening, Your Excellency. As you stated before, you want to be known for your reform of the United Nations. Do you see more benefit or disadvantage to the reform of the Security Council by representation of countries from different continents or regions, such as South America or Africa? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. We've been seeing that since countries actually have political interests, there is the issue in which sometimes when they violate laws which are not in accordance to the UN principles, it is sometimes quite hard for us, like in ASEAN countries, such as with the recent case of the Philippines, to actually condemn these issues due to political interest. What would be your views on this? Thank you.
Hello, sir. Not so long ago, the Korean government received a certain amount of money from the Japanese government to end discussions about the Korean comfort women who were sexually harassed by Japanese soldiers during the Japanese imperialism. I would like to know your opinion on this decision. Do you believe it is fair for the Korean government to shush these issues when the victims themselves still live in the same world with us? Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Concerned with the current refugee crisis issue, what do you think is the best way to redistribute the refugees to the receiving countries? Will a more sophisticated recommendatory quota system will be useful, or will it be effective? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. There's no doubt that the dynamics of the world are changing and the UN has several goals going forward. But what do you, from your personal experience as the Secretary General, see as the greatest challenge, and how would you like the youth to see it overcome? Thank you.
Good evening. Similar to the previous question, you mentioned the refugee crisis earlier in your speech. Do you think it is the prerogative of the UNHCR to control the intake of refugees across various countries, or should this be left solely to the sovereign rights of each country, such as Germany, in its recent decision to leave its borders open?
Good evening, Your Excellency. I have two quick questions. The first one is, while I won't deny the existence of challenges facing women today in less developed countries, the obstacles women face in developed countries are still very present, such as the pay gap between men and women, especially women of color and modern rape culture. While there have been concrete solutions for the former, it seems as if there has been a lack for the latter. How can the UN work further to improve gender inequality? And secondly, the UN was meant to be the reincarnation of the League of Nations, to succeed where it had failed. Looking at the disintegration of alliances like the EU and NATO, what relevance and success do you think the UN can have in the future? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. I've got a question relating to the Syrian war. And I know that the UN is not allowed to step into any individual country's affairs, but this has really affected many countries, especially especially the European countries and the Middle East countries. And at what point do you think the UN should step in to prevent this from becoming the Third World War?
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. In your lecture, you talked a lot about your strong belief for female empowerment and empowerment of the youth, but I want to know your opinion on LGBTQ empowerment and LGBTQ rights. Thank you.
Hi, Your Excellency. You spoke a lot about the youth and the future generation, and I was just wondering, what do you think is lacking in education systems around the world today?
Good evening, Your Excellency. As a student aspiring to join the United Nations as a career, what steps could I take in order to start working towards this? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellencies. I have two questions here. Firstly, as a citizens of Malaysia, right? So we have a lot of corruptions, authoritarian rules freeze, there's demeaning of human rights and discriminations of minority. So what is your views or the UN's visions to help the small countries to adapt to obtain social liberty? And my second question is, there's a changing leadership landscape that has occurred across the countries, and when the change of leadership happens, then there's a change and shift in the country's focus and their commitment to the UN development program. So how do you cope with the changing leadership to ensure that they're still committed to the program? And secondly, does UN have any contingency plan if Donald Trump were to be elected as the President of the United States?
Good evening, Your Excellency. My only question for you is that do you foresee a woman ever becoming the General Secretary of the United Nations? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. My question for you today is, how could the UN help Europe tackle the current refugee crisis? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. I would like to ask a question. What can we, as the youth of this generation, do right now to contribute to the UN agenda, SDG, and the future as a whole? Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. I would like to ask this question. How can we, the future of our world, combat uneven development at a global scale? Thank you.
Good evening, sir. As a student, I would like to ask you how we can contribute to making this world a more sustainable and a better place. Thank you.
Okay, last question.
Good evening, sir. I've got two questions for you. The first one being, what is the hardest decision you've had to make, and why? And the second, can the UN play a proactive role in the current economic crisis that we're facing? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We've come to the end of this lecture and public session. I think you've gotten a sense of the Singapore youth, Your Excellency, that the Singaporeans, the young people, are very much engaged with world affairs, with the United Nations, are very much inspired by your presence here today. I'm taking the right as being the moderator to ask you the final question. Yes, yes. And you don't have to answer this. But you earlier said, in your speech, you said, I stand ready to serve if I can do anything to help in the demilitarization of the Korean Peninsula. Now, we all know that the presidential elections in Korea is the end of next year. As you are the leading candidate, can I take it as a yes, that when you do become president of Korea, you will come back here one more time and deliver an address to us as president of Korea? Just say yes, sir, and that's the end of it. Would you like to say a few final remarks?
For that, no comment. I'm Secretary General. I'm not in a position to say anything about my future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have taken note of all very pertinent questions concerning how United Nations can help this world and these people, particularly young people and women, can live sustainably with human dignity. I cannot answer all the questions, but what I can make you sure as a Secretary General is that this sustainable agenda aims by 2030. It's 15 years away, and climate change agreement is aiming, in fact, by the end of this century, 2100, maybe 2099, December. I can surely tell you that even before going to 2050, by 2030, I'm sure that all the people of the world can live in a much more prosperous and harmonious, healthier world. That's our vision. Of course, all the visions and all the promises may not be met, but we have to work hard to meet that target. That's our target. By climate change, if we can shorten the target, not necessarily waiting until 2100, I think we can do it. With transformative technology and science, I think we can shorten our target, this one. That I'm telling you. There were a lot of questions about the youth. I have already said something, but UN will devote much more emphasis on the way how we can make sure that youth, young people, can play an important role in working together with the current generation. And you are already part of this. We are the last generation to tackle climate change, and we are the first generation, we may be the first generation to address these poverty issues. We can make sure that nobody is suffering from abject poverty. That can be done. That can be done by 2030. By 2030, United Nations has made it quite clear that this planet Earth will be 50-50, men and women, by 2030. And this all will have to be done by the world leaders and business communities and civil society. Now, the importance of civil society has been growing. In the past, it used to always be president, prime minister, ministers who have absolute power. But absolute power and real power comes from people. The civil society and young people, you raise your voice. You make sure that you challenge your prime ministers, president, and ministers. Look, this is the world where I have to live. This is the era where I have to demonstrate my full capacity just to give us opportunity. And this is what I'm asking you. Raise your voice. You have no limit. And I can guarantee, as a Secretary General, and I'm sure that if by any chance, if I have another opportunity, I will work with you again. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the 8th Horehua Leadership in Asia public lecture. Can I ask you to join me to express our gratitude and appreciation to His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.